Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, and I want to talk about my wish list for 11th edition 40k. We can probably guess that next summer we're going to get 11th edition. This is not insider information, by the way. I have no idea. It's just based off trends about how they usually go about 3 years between editions, which you can leave a comment below about whether you think that's a good or a bad thing for the hobby. It's obviously good for their business because it keeps sales going, but it can be tough for the consumer because it doesn't really give time for the game to really get to a really good place before they reset it and go to the next edition. Either way, I'm actually excited to see them hit 11th edition because to me, 10th edition really has fallen flat. Almost from the beginning, it has failed to really address some of the problems of 9th and has introduced even more of them. Now, I've already addressed this in the last video I did where I talked about how terrain is a symptom of the problem, not the solution, although at the same time it is used as a solution. And in this video, I want to talk more about those problems and what I hope Games Workshop will do in 11th to address those problems. And of course, this video is sponsored by us, because we have the Ruins of Perdition out for pre-order right now. The Kickstarter was run about a month ago, and now we have the late pledges, so you can still get the Kickstarter prices at miniwargaming.com/perdition. Ruins of Perdition is a fully modular, magnetizable, easy to paint, easy to build terrain set that is designed for competitive play, but also because of its modularity, you can easily make awesome narrative looking tables. And if you have a 3D printer, great, we have STLs for you, so you can really save money and get a lot of terrain and flat pack it and store it really, really well at home. If you don't have a 3D printer, no problem. Right now, during the pre-order, we have our special Kickstarter prices, and because it flat packs, we actually offer decent shipping prices all over the world. So go check that out at miniwargaming.com/perdition. So to start talking about the problems of 10th edition, the big one, of course, is simply lethality. Everything dies too easily. Now this breaks down to a lot of different things. And I talked about this in the last video, but I'm going to recap them here. So if you didn't watch that video, no problem. The first is that there are too many attacks. Each individual model is way more powerful than they were in earlier editions. Now this is not universally true, but it's true often enough that the lethality of the game has really increased. That we see more attacks with typically better weapon skills and ballistic skills than before, and higher strengths and armor piercing. You add in the fact that there's a lot more lethal stratagems, and also that there's the mortal wound mechanic, which has existed before, but it really feels to be more prominent now than it was before, that things can just kill so much. And then add in another problem, which is that the game introduces way more rerolls than almost any previous edition before that, and has all sorts of ways to give bonuses to hit and to wound. And on top of that, the cover system really doesn't help that much, like, except for line of sight blocking. Cover is a +1 save, not a big deal. Or as you look at earlier editions, cover could literally be a 4-up to ignore the damage, which maybe was overdoing it, but at least gave it a lot more utility. On top of that, because it now is standard to play at 2,000 points, where it used to be kind of 1,500, maybe 1,750 or 1,850 at tournaments, and the table is smaller, and everything costs less points, you now have more models on the table. The models take up more space because typically base sizes have gotten bigger. You're on a smaller table, and everything is more lethal, and you're playing with more points. You can kind of see how this is going to escalate into a big problem for the game. Add on that the solution to this is to create boring looking tables with the same terrain layouts over and over again, all your L-shaped ruins and U-shaped ruins and line of sight blocking in ways that don't even really match what a city would look like, because you can't have those long firing lanes that a road would provide, because that would give shooting armies way more, or whoever goes first, way too much of an advantage. So now you have to have all this crisscrossing, weird grid-like stuff that does not represent reality at all. And then in order to win, you've got to hide your units rather than playing thematically, charging across the table in awesome ways. You're more jumping from cover to cover, playing hide and seek and cat and mouse, which does not feel like what happens in the books or the video games or any of the entertainment that we have for Warhammer 40k. And that's what we want, right? We want to be able to play thematically. A lot of people want to play competitively, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if the game is only going to work that way with our boring terrain layouts, then there is a problem. So what do I want to see for 11th edition? Well, obviously I want all of these things corrected, but let's go through them one by one and talk about how I think each of them could be addressed. First and foremost, reduce lethality in each of the individual models and units. That would be reducing the attacks to something that's more not crazy. Okay, so we look at earlier editions with the Space Marine. Let's just use a Space Marine as a nice standard. The Tactical Marine in the earlier editions of, let's go back to 4th edition, because I've been playing that recently, and then we'll talk about 7th and all the way up to 10th. In 4th edition, a Space Marine with a bolter would hit on 3s. That really hasn't changed too much. It has really, but we'll come back to that. He hits on 3s and can fire 12 inches at 2 shots, or 24 inches if it stands still. And that's the big thing right there, right? Is that it only got that long range shooting. And there was no armor penetrating, well, that's not true. There's like AP 5 on it. So they would ignore 5 up saves and 6 up saves. But it wouldn't ignore 4 up saves, 3 up saves, or 2 up saves. And it wouldn't ignore cover either. And those Space Marines were considered to be pretty good. Obviously, there was more elite units that would perform different roles, but that was the crux of whatever you had. And you didn't have a lot of ways to re-roll that. You didn't have a lot of ways to add to it or subtract from it. It was just a simple hit on a 3, strength 4, AP 5 hit. We fast forward to 10th edition, and we look at the equivalent, which would be the intercessors. I know we still have tacticals, but let's look at the intercessors, which are more the de facto standard Space Marine. And now, if they fire at the same thing, they get to fire 4 times, up to, I think it's 24 inches. I actually don't know the range. It might even be longer than that now. And they're firing not only 4 times each, so now 10 guys fire 40 shots at that range, whereas 10 guys would fire 10 shots at that range before. So think about that, 10 dice versus 40 dice, 4 times as many. And the points cost of the intercessors is less than the tacticals. And on top of that, you have Oath of Moment, which if you really want that target dead, you choose it, and you get to re-roll the hit rolls, and you get +1 to wound. We're not even talking about stratagems or anything else that you could attach to that unit. So that regular squad of troop choices just went from 10 shots hitting on 3, strength 4, AP 5, to 40 shots hitting on 3s, re-rolling, which 3s re-rolling is, it's not guaranteed, but it's pretty darn close to guaranteed. So it treats it more like a little better than a 2-up to hit, is a 3-up re-rollable. And then on top of that, having some armor penetration to them as well against anything, is just kind of ridiculous. Oh, and +1 to wound from the Oath of Moment as well. It's just, you know what's going to happen when you roll 40 dice. There's not really any statistical anomalies about whether you're going to get a certain number of hits. If I'm rolling 40 dice hitting on 3s re-rolling, I'm going to get 35 to 38 hits. And if it's strength 4 +1 to wound against, let's say, a toughness 4 thing, well, now I need 3s to wound, and so I'm going to get 24 wounds. And if it's AP -1 and they have, let's say, a 3-up save, well, those 24 wounds will become 12 wounds. And it's going to be 12, give or take 1 or 2. It's not going to, like, you're not going to get surprised and do 25 damage or 0 damage. That will happen every once in a while, but not in any way to make it significant. It's just going to be like one-offs every once in a while. Whereas in a game of 4th edition or 7th edition, that thing would happen in the same game, that you'd have these wild rolls where they'd all hit, or that none of them would hit, or very few, or just because of how few dice you're rolling, the statistics of it would swing back and forth. And then on top of that, we're not playing 2,000 point game standards rather than 1,500 points like before. Models cost less and the table is smaller. So address those things. You want to fix it? Then have less shots. Have the intercessor not have 4 shots when it fires at the same thing. Get rid of all of these rerolls. That would be what I would say too. So reduce lethality of the units. Push smaller points. So 1,000 points and 1,500 points should be pushed as standard size games. Not just, we'll have it in there. Well, they don't even have 1,500 points. It's 500, 1,000, and 2,000. There's not even 1,500 points mentioned. And if you don't mention it as the designer of the game, players typically won't do it. This is one thing I have noticed. Because so many times I'll be like, well, just do what you want. And people are like, no, that's not how you're supposed to play the game. The game was designed to be played at 2,000 points on a 44 by 60 mat with this much terrain. That's what it was designed and play tested to be. And I'm like, I doubt that. Like, maybe it's true, but I doubt that. I doubt that every last unit has been play tested with that in mind. There's just too much stuff in 40k for one thing to have it all play tested. And we can see that internal balance in the codexes does not exist. That there are units that are just going to be better at the same task than other units. So if everything was perfectly play tested that way, we would see everything perfectly balanced, which I don't want, by the way. Perfectly balanced does not mean more fun. In fact, it might be a little boring. You want it to have some imbalance where things will be better in certain situations than others. But that's hard to pull off too, especially with the number of different types of units and factions that 40k has. Another thing I'd love to see in 11th, and this seems like a minor thing, but I think it could really help with some of the other suggestions I'll have, is get rid of this whole -1/+1 cap onto hits and wounds. So if there's multiple things that are -1 to hit, let them stack. I know that there were problems with specific things in earlier editions, but I find that overall there's some knee-jerk reactions to fixing rules in ways that don't need to be fixed. So I'll give an example. I remember when they introduced the no more than 2 flyers rules, because we were having problems with certain flyers, like the burner bombers for the orcs. And meanwhile, you have like the Imperial Guard with their Valkyries going, why can I only bring 2 of these? They're not that great, and they're very thematic to bring in like a bunch of them. And now that rule no longer exists. It's the rule of 3 now, unless they're a dedicated transport, you can bring more. But still, like overcorrecting because one thing is imbalanced and then ruining the rest. So the whole -1/+1 to hit and wound thing, where you can't get more than -1 or +1 to hit and wound, to me is another one of those symptoms where it's like, well, these things can stack it too much. It's like, well, then address those specific instances rather than this blanket thing. Because the moment you get rid of being able to stack minuses and pluses, you lose a bit of granularity. And so if we allow for minuses and pluses to stack, then you can have them appear in more places. For example, terrain can be a little more interesting than line of sight blocking and +1 to save. That's basically all that terrain does right now. I know there's a few more things that it does, but that's essentially all it does right now. It blocks line of sight and gives +1 to save. The end. And that +1 to save doesn't even work if you're a 3-up armor and the guy has AP nothing, because you can't improve a 3-up save. Which I understand, because they're trying to say that Space Marines are already armored enough, but it still seems like, that's not really the right way to address it. Instead, you could introduce different types of terrain. Even if you go as simple as light and heavy, that light is a -1 to hit, and heavy is -1 to hit and +1 to save, that's already more interesting, especially if that -1 to hit can stack. So if you have a unit that has like a stealthiness to it, and so now it gets into cover, and heck, maybe its stealthiness even adds on that if it's in cover, it gets an additional -1 to hit. And so it's actually -3 to hit. So essentially, and 6 is always hit, of course. And that allows it to use terrain to its benefit in that way. And of course, this can be abused. I'm not saying this is perfect, but I'm just saying to be able to have this flavor in having light and heavy cover, or light, medium, and heavy, or you can still have your different keywords, like this cover is obscuring, and so instead of blocking line of sight, it gives a -1 to hit. This cover is, give it some sort of keyword that tells you it's +1 to save, and another keyword, like it's light cover, so it's +1 to save, and heavy cover is +2 to save. You can still say you can't improve the saves beyond 3+, that's fine, just to represent the Space Marines having that. Or maybe Space Marines have other rules, like if you want to shoot through them. This is one thing I'd love to see brought back, by the way. Shooting through a unit at another unit provides that unit with cover. I really liked that before because it allowed for less terrain and instead for units to shield other units and provide that benefit. That to me is a really good thing that we've lost, having cover through units. And you don't even have to have it be like line of sight based. You can just trace a line, and if it's going through the footprint of that unit, especially if, or maybe it's specific to certain units, like Space Marines provide that because they're mobile cover, whatever it might be. There's a lot of these little things that I think would really help to improve the game. And also having terrain levels matter more. I know we have plunging fire right now, but I don't know, when's the last time you saw that happen? Part of it's because it requires you to be, I think, 5 or 6 inches higher in order to get that benefit. And I don't think it should be that. It should just be if you're at least 2 or 3 inches higher. And that way it allows for terrain to play more of a part. And that plunging fire should be like +1 to wound and maybe an extra AP on top of that, just to really make it so that people want to go up into the terrain and have that advantage. And sure, of course, that means that your heavy weapon squads are going to camp up there and fire down, but that means that they can't go off and perform secondaries and grab objectives, and so that's a limitation that they are going to have. And because they'll be less lethal, they won't be firing a million shots with rerolls and pluses to hit and minuses to wound, except for the plunging fire thing. It'll allow them to be more lethal, but still less lethal than they are right now, which I think is the big problem. There are a lot of other wishes that I have for 11th edition, but honestly, if those things are corrected, I think the 11th edition can be one of the best editions of 40k ever. No, I would like to see armor facings return. Maybe do it like Necromunda in the Ash Waste, where you don't bring back armor values, just armor facings. In other words, if you're hitting the side, the toughness is different. So it's like toughness 11 out front, 10 outside, and toughness 8 in the back or something like that. And when you're fighting in close combat, you always get to hit the back armor unless it's a walker. I really actually miss that stuff. And if I could really get it back, I'd love to have facings matter for like the weapons on these vehicles as well. So that you can't just stick the rear end of a Lehman Russ out and then fire its battle cannon at that thing. I really do miss that. Having played earlier editions now, I'm like, you know what? These really worked. And if I can really get my way, bring back blast markers and flamer templates. I know some of you are going to really disagree with that because there's a lot of fights over which way they scatter and all that kind of stuff. But to me, it felt like you were firing a flamer rather than being like D6 shots or whatever, D3+1 shots, because it's a blast weapon. And I just really enjoyed the cinematic aspect of all of that. And just make it so that the game can play with a lot less terrain. Having a lot of terrain on the table, of course, it should work as well. I love the Cities of Death feel. In the older editions, that was brought in as a thing, like let's play Cities of Death. And then they would introduce rules like flamers would actually hit a certain number of times rather than placing a template, because it would be impossible to place a template inside of those buildings. So they would address that. And I could go on for a very long time. But if you can address the lethality and the point size of the game, and the number of models on the table, I think that would make 11th edition really awesome. Now I realize that some of these changes are not really in line with making as much money as possible, because obviously if you encourage smaller games, then people need less models and they buy less models. And that isn't always going to be what a company wants to do. But I believe, and I really do believe this, that if you can address those issues, that the money you lose by having players need less models, which by the way, I don't even think you would lose money, because players buy tons and tons of models. They don't just buy exactly what they need. They want big collections, especially because of the number of releases that you have. But I think that you would regain it in number of players who would be interested in the game and how much it would revitalize 40k. And I'm not saying 40k is dying. It is the opposite of that. We're seeing lots of improvements in it and everything in terms of number of customers. But I'm saying take it even to the next level, to bring back the narrative thematic aspect of it, where the game could play in the way that people want it to play according to the novels and the TV shows that are coming out and the video games that we have already seen and how they work. That's my spiel. We'll see what happens in 11th edition, maybe next summer. Thanks for watching. Happy wargaming.